Ember Witch. Book 1. The Lich. Volume 1. Black Tragedy. Chapter 3. Half-Blood. October 21st to December 21st, 458 BME. Fragment 16. Plots. Neela, Cress and Lion were left in the dungeon as the guards led Persian up the stairs. They came to Vera's cell and Lion unlocked the door. Vera stepped out and bowed to the Morden, then to Neela.
"Thank you for your hospitality, Your Grace,"
she said sarcastically, then looked to Fevra's cell. Lion followed her gaze, but didn't open his cell.
"So what about Fevra? He is my partner and a Cynder. He goes where I go,"
Vera said with a slight anger in her tone.
"If he is your partner, then you surely can feel that darkness flowing through him. I will not risk having a Lyran running around my city unchecked and as dangerous as he is,"
Lion said, and Vera stepped forward to argue her point further, but Cress stepped in.
"Vera, please calm down. He will be released as soon as we deal with Persian. Due to his dark pressure that, mind you, we still don't understand entirely, he is safer here for the moment. The guards are already on their toes because we are getting you out. Just trust us here, please,"
she said, getting in front of Vera, before she could step any closer.
"This better not be a fucking lie. I am not leaving this city without him. I will not abandon him,"
Vera said, pushing forward as Cress tried to hold her back.
"I assure you, Vera, that he will leave unharmed and by your side when we have the answers we need,"
Lion said, looking Vera in the eyes.
"Bullshit. He comes with me now. I don't give a fuck about the guards or you for any matter. Fevra is getting out of here with me,"
Vera argued. Fevra during all of this hadn't moved. He sat against the door staring down at the floor like he had been doing for hours. He could hear everything that was being said. He didn't care. Vera was trying to get him out of the cell he deserved to be in. This was his punishment for the murder of his brother. He wanted nothing more than to die with these walls, but Vera was refusing his wish. He didn't deserve her sympathy. In fact, she had never acted this way before. It was almost against her character that she cared so much about him.
"Fine, but I warn you right now that anything he does will reflect on you. If he uses some sort of unknown magic, you will die alongside him. Do you understand?"
Lion said, and Vera nodded. Lion unlocked the door, and Vera ran forward, dropping to her knees, wrapping her arms around Fevra.
"Get up. Fevra, please get up. I need you,"
Vera said, and Fevra began coming to his senses. The warmth of her body pressed against his, the smell of her even without being cleaned for months. Her voice in his ears made him feel something more than the pull of his depression. He grasped Vera's hand with his remaining hand and looked into her eyes.
"There's my hunter, get your ass up, we have a job to finish,"
Vera said with a smile and pulled Fevra up to his feet. He stood with a wobble and looked at Neela and Cress, who watched him with sympathetic stares. Vera helped him walk for a few steps before he finally got his balance back. He stood tall, although still miserable, and awaited his eventual scalding from anyone. Cress ran forward after a moment of silence and wrapped her arms around him.
"You two scared the shit out of me, you know that,"
Cress said, pressing herself into him.
"What are you talking about?"
he curiously asked, still dazed by his darkness.
"When Lion sent us news about both of your injuries, I assumed the worst,"
Cress said, and let him go.
"This is all so sweet, but we do have business to attend to,"
Lion said, interrupting the moment. The group of Cynders looked at each other, then back to Lion and nodded, allowing her to lead them up to her throne room. They made their way through stairwells, hallways, and doors, finally arriving in the throne room. It was small and humble, compared to Kaisha's. A small wooden throne sat at the back of the room with a fireplace off to the left. The older white-furred woman stepped forward and sat on her throne, passing Persian, who had been chained to a small ring that sat in the center of the room. The four Cynders each took to standing at opposite sides of the room, forming a box around Persian.
Our first order of business falls to you too,
Lion said, pointing at both Vera and Fevra.
I have already been informed by Neela that you were on assignment, however what she failed to tell me was the details of this job. According to the reports from the many people who witnessed your fight, you had engaged Persian and Takashi in combat immediately as you approached them. I am sure you were aware at the time that Takashi had a bounty on his head due to the murder of the Grand Bell Sage. Were you hunting Takashi for his crimes, or were you within my hold for another reason?
Lion said as she watched the two Cynder's responses. Both Vera and Fevra looked utterly confused at her words.
Excuse me? Did you just say what I think you said? Takashi murdered the Grand Bell Sage? For what reason would he ever kill someone of such high degree within the government?
Vera asked, utterly baffled by every word she had said. It made no sense to her. Takashi was one of the last people she thought could take such drastic action.
Did you have a contract against the sage?
Vera asked Neela.
No, he acted alone. At least that is my view of the situation.
Neela answered, and Vera turned to Cress, who shrugged.
Fevra and I were on assignment hunting the trash chained to the floor. He was convicted of murder within Shikari. Upon our arrival to Shikari, we questioned the victim's family and gathered information about who we were after. For some reason, Neela decided to keep us in the dark about the finer details of the job. No name, no description, just a family who witnessed the murder. I received a letter from Cress detailing who we were after within a few days of our departure from Shikari. I was unsure about how she was able to come by this information at the time, however she informed us that our mark would most likely be hiding in Halcyon. Due to us being on the road and on the job at the time, I decided we would pursue him without involvement from your Cynder. You have 2 Cynders at your disposal and over 100 miles of land they hunt. Attempting to contact either of them for a single target would only waste time. Upon our arrival to Halcyon, we stopped at the Green Gem Inn where we stayed overnight. We left early the next morning and found Takashi by his color. You can gather the rest just from the witnesses.
Vera explained, taking the time to detail the events that led to this situation.
And the Lyran has been traveling with you since this job was taken?
Lion asked, expecting an explanation of how a wolf made its way so far from its forest.
I have been training with Vera for just over a year now. I was assigned as her partner by Neela, who rescued me from myself.
Fevra said after getting up his confidence. He was still shaken and confused. He had festered in his self-pity for so long that it was taking him a long time to regain his faith in himself. He wasn't sure if he ever would.
I take it that you use this pressure to keep people at bay. It vibrates and crashes into your enemies, causing them dread and self-loathing. My guards struggled to make their way down the stairs due to your energy. Tell me, Wolf, why do you use this power even in the presence of your family?
Lion asked, with curiosity.
It is not something I control, Your Grace. I was exiled from my pack for crimes I committed by using a necromantic weapon that had possessed me.
Fevra replied, keeping his eyes down as he spoke. He felt the empty space where his arm should have been, but pushed back his emotions in an attempt to suppress his darkness.
For the love of the gods, shut up. I am falling asleep here.
Persian said in a mocking tone. Cress turned to him with a frown but didn't say anything. She knew that he was just trying to rile up everyone by being an annoyance.
Well, because our guest wants to speak so badly, why not let him explain his side of the story?
Lion said, extending her arm out, gesturing towards him.
I don't have anything to say, you are just boring me to tears.
Persian replied, and Lion stood up. She walked down to him and lifted his head to examine him.
I'm sure you do have something to say. You were in the confrontation and surely have plenty of information on why Takashi was there.
Lion said, dropping his head.
As was said before, I am a wanted man. A Cynder found me and that's it. I don't know what else I can tell you.
He said as Lion walked around him.
Persian, there is nothing that you can do. You are bound from your color, you are chained to my throne room floor, and your life is already over. In the matter of a few days you will be beheaded for your crimes. I suggest you talk or your death will not be so quick. I have a hatred for torture, but in this instance I will have no issues with retrieving the information any way necessary.
Lion said, placing her hand on the top of his head.
I have nothing to say. You think threatening me will do anything?
He asked and tried to move his head, but was stopped as Lion grasped it, digging her claws into his flesh. Persian winced, but didn't say anything, not even a whimper.
Oh, I'm sure you have plenty to say,
Lion said as she pressed energy into his head. She began glowing a soft bluish green and Persian began twitching. The 4 Cynders who stood around the prisoner watched in stunned silence as his limbs began shaking and expanding. Persian began screaming as his muscles swelled and twitched. Lion pulled her hand away and the energy ceased.
Do you want to speak now or should I continue?
She asked and Persian gasped.
Takashi was here to pay me for my job. He owed me 1,000 gold but refused to pay because I was being hunted.
Persian cried out and Lion pressed her energy into his body again. He screamed again as his body twitched. Vera looked at his agony with interest, while Fevra was appalled by it. Neela had no emotional interest in the matter, instead just looking at him with a mundane nothingness to her. Cress, on the other hand, was relishing her father's suffering. She had waited years for this moment. Beating after beating, scars and bruises, verbal wounds and trauma all caught up in a storm of emotion. She had wanted to see this man in agony for so long she couldn't help but laugh. Lion pulled away and the scream ceased.
By the gods, Takashi was working with the Void Moths. He wanted to create blood blades for some reason, that's all I know, I swear.
Persian cried and Lion reached her hand out again.
Please no. Please. All right. I'll tell you everything, please no more.
He sobbed and Lion pulled her arm back.
If you hold anything back, if you lie about anything, I will not stop until you are nothing but a corpse. Do you understand me?
Lion said and Persian nodded while crying on the floor.
Now what was Takashi doing here?
Lion asked, walking back to her throne and sat down.
He was contracted by the Elven to eliminate key targets. It was his job to create chaos with the holds for some plan the elves have made. I assume the necromancers were part of it, but he kept me in the dark most of the time. He never even told me what the plan was, just that he needed me to murder some noble girl and Shikari while he killed the Bell Sage. We were to meet here where he would give me my money and plan your assassination.
Persian said after gasping for air. The room went silent for several moments as the words sunk in.
Do you think we are stupid? What the fuck did you think would happen if you were to blatantly lie about something like this? You must be insane to make up such a ridiculous story.
Cress said, stepping forward to her father.
It's the truth. For Kellis' sake, it's the truth.
Persian said as Lion extended her color again.
Perhaps we should take his words as truth, Lion. I doubt any one of us could take much more of this torture than he has already. If what he says is true, there is something bigger going on than just a few murders and property damage. Takashi wouldn't have killed the Bell Sage without reason. If he was solely motivated by money, that is one thing, but the mention of blood blades is something entirely different. If the Elven are truly involved, then this could mean the beginning of a war.
Neela said, putting her arm out to keep Cress from rushing forward to assist in the torture of the now sobbing man still chained to the ground before them.
A war? There has been peace for over 200 years. Why would the Elven attempt to break that peace? What would be in it for them? They already hold control of Sin's garden. There is no other place on Haven more connected to magic than that island. I don't understand why they would take such drastic steps towards unbalance when there hasn't been any major political instability for 100 years.
Lion said, trying to make sense of the situation.
Does any of this make sense? What the fuck is going on here?
Vera asked as she began pacing.
Calm down, Vera. There is no need to let this situation get worse by letting your emotions take over. Our first goal should be quelling the necromancers. They are the immediate threat. I highly doubt the Elven would travel around the continent to attack our lands first. They would crush the humans and move their troops east from the Queen's Crown. We have time to prepare for an invasion, however the humans do not.
Neela replied and looked at her.
If the Elven take the Queen's crown, they would have a major tactical advantage over every race, not just us. That mountain range is highly formidable as it was. Now that the humans have expanded the walls out to the Great Sea, the Elven would be able to withstand any siege. The only reason why the humans would lose their advantage is due to their inability to use magic. Every race from the Orson to the Lyran would be slowly destroyed as the Elven could hold the seat of power and continue to advance throughout the continent. They are masters of color, highly trained combatants, and have the numbers to wipe us from existence without even breaking a sweat. Not even the combined strength of the Fyron and Orson could stand against them. We need to act immediately and learn more about this invasion. I suggest we split our Cynder into 2 groups. One will silence the necromancers growing in our borders, and the other will track down any Elven spies within the mainland and eliminate them. I can only guess what their king would do once he learns his spies are dead, but at this point we have little choice. If what Persean says is true, they have already been creating opportunities for their invasion. If there is an Elven spy here, there must be one in the human kingdom and the False Sea. Each manipulating the governmental bodies into fracturing as to weaken the system before they arrive. Chaos breeds instability and fear. When an entire population is fearful, they are weak. You must inform Kaisha immediately. We have little time to lose.
Lion explained as she moved back in her throne.
I will send a message immediately, however there is still the question of whether Persian is lying.
Neela replied, looking down at the pathetic man who was still crying.
I have my doubts, but it doesn't change the situation. I will delay his execution for now in hopes of investigating the claims further. However, Persean, you will be sentenced to death for murder and treason. There is no getting out of it,
Lion said, turning to him. He sat up with tears running down his face, and looked Lion over, then sunk down once again in a pitiful display of acknowledgement.
Fevra, is it? I assume you are aware of what this might mean for your people. If the Elven are planning an invasion, they must be warned. We must unite together in order to defend our lands. Although the Fyron and Lyran have not been in political contact for some time, I would be surprised if they were to allow such devastation to occur.
Lion said, now looking at Fevra, who had been silent the entire time. He looked up from his trance and nodded, but didn't say anything. He looked around the room with glazed eyes, as if he wasn't even sure where he was. Darren noticed that he had begun to push out his dark pressure like he had been when they first met, and walked to him.
Fevra, please get a hold of yourself,
she said softly, grabbing his hand, and looked deeply into his eyes. Cress noticed how she looked at him and started to feel jealous and angry. She realized that the loss of his arm must have taken a massive toll on his emotional state, but she couldn't help but feel like Vera was taking something away from her in that moment. Vera pressed her head against his chest and interlocked her fingers with his.
Please come back to me. I understand your pain. We need you here, not in some depressed state. Please let me help you recover from this,
Vera said, holding herself to him and letting his darkness wash into her. The two stood there for a moment before Fevra finally spoke.
Thank you, Vera.
The 4 Cynders left the throne room and had been given horses for their journey back to Myopia. Vera and Fevra had been given their cloaks and utility belts back, which they put on before mounting the horses. Vera had to assist Fevra with the buckles as his missing arm was a hindrance to his normal functionality. It took several tries before he was able to mount his horse, but he managed. Even after months of riding experience, he was still uncomfortable on a horse. He was especially clumsy now that he was missing an arm. Their journey was long and hard on not only Fevra but the rest of the group. Fevra's dark aura caused their morale to fall apart day after day. Despite being angry, agitated, and depressed, they didn't break out into fights. Neela understood the circumstances that were causing this emotional pain. Cress was holding back everything from exploding because she knew the pain Fevra was holding on to, and Vera had been dealing with and learning about this presence for over a year. They all were being affected by this darkness, and knew that if they were to let it win, they would fail in not only reaching Myopia, but stopping the necromancers from growing any more powerful. the weather was harsh and cold. Their food supplies were running low and they slept only a few hours a day. Nothing that they could do or say would change the situation besides pushing forward and making it back home safely. 3 weeks into their trip they stopped for a night to rest, but had finally broken their self-assured nature that they would make it back before they starved or froze to death in the snow and cold.
We will die if we continue like this. It doesn't matter if we are a week away from myopia. We have no food left. We have had no sleep for days. Neela, we need to hunt for something.
Cress said as she finished setting up the tent they all shared.
I will go.
Fevre said, holding a blue flame in his hand to keep him warm as the wind began to pick up.
You will not be going alone. Cress, help him as Vera and I finish up here,
Neela said, looking to Fevre, who had slowly begun to come back to his old self. Despite his depression and pain, he was beginning to get used to his handicap. Fevre put his head down as Cress approached and turned from her. Cress shot him a look of disbelief and walked past him towards a small thicket of woods. Fevre followed her with a thought as to why she had looked at him in that way. They made their way through bushes, trees, and large weeds in search of something to eat. There were no signs of animals, besides for the occasional bird which Cress had shot down from branches using her color. She gathered what she could, placing them in one of her many pockets as Fevre lagged behind, keeping his senses open for any game that might be hiding within burrows. After coming across a small creek that hadn't completely frozen over, they stopped to fill up their water supply and get a drink for themselves. Fevre leaned against a tree gazing at his stump, which had fully healed.
I'm sorry,
he said softly, trying not to look up to Cress, who had just finished gulping down a large mouthful of water.
What for? You haven't done anything wrong,
Cress replied, standing up to look at him.
I failed. I was unable to stop Takashi and ended up becoming a cripple. I am not worthy of calling myself a Cynder. I have been dragging you, Neela and Vera down ever since our first meeting. I can't control my pressure and am causing you all to deal with its destructive power,
Fevre said, still not looking at Cress. She stepped forward and expanded her color. She summoned a small blade and charged at Fevre. In a flash of blue energy, Fevre deflected a slash that would have cut deep into his chest.
Stop being a crybaby already. You have not failed, you are only a failure in your own mind. For Kayla's sake, Fever, isn't it obvious to you? How the fuck could someone be so dense? I have been holding back tears for weeks. My entire being has been on a knife's edge since we got you out of Lion's prison. Only a Cynder could have deflected my attack, only a true mage could summon their color in an instant and defend themselves from such a strike. You are a Cynder, now act like one,
Cress yelled out and struck again. Fevre blocked each of her slashes as they moved away from the creek in a dance of combat. Fevre tried to keep her from getting an edge over him, but the clumsy way he moved from using his left hand was beginning to show as each one of her strikes got closer and closer to cutting him. He ducked under a slash that went high and reacted by extending his right arm out, but with only a stump he was caught by a kick to the head. He fumbled back and Cress was on top of him, her blade to his throat. They fell to the ground with a crunch as the snow around them compressed. Fevre dropped his aura and submitted to his defeat. Cress pressed the energy blade to his throat, then in an instant began kissing him. Fevre fell into the kiss with open arms as her full weight pressed down on him. He rolled her over while still kissing her and pressed himself against her. They fought each other in a new kind of combat. Tearing at each other's clothes, breathing hard and struggling to make sense of where his body began and hers ended. Cress pushed Fevre to the ground and began grinding against his pelvis. She held her hands to his chest as he penetrated her. Their breath now heavier, creating dense clouds in the cold air. Fevre couldn't say what was more intense, the cold wet ground he was pressed against or the pleasure of her body and his moving together. Cress gyrated and moved with such confidence that his mind began to go blank from ecstasy. He felt something pressing into his stomach as she laid her chest against his, but only cared about the feeling of absolute skill she had. They both moaned and breathed heavily as they climaxed together.